A reading from my book, One Bypass, One Stroke, One Survivor. Fear. This one is hard for me. Even when I think about it, the fear comes back, and it's terrible. I felt afraid from the time I realized that I had had a stroke. I was terrified in my living room waiting for the first aid squad to arrive, and I was terrified in the hospital's emergency room. I was afraid from my first moment in the hospital, perhaps the more so because everything was so surreal, blurred, and confusing. I remember strobe lights from the concerts and shows when I was younger, and it was like that, kind of in and out, and always out of sequence, always weird. I was afraid that I was going to die. Later, I was afraid that I wasn't going to die, but that I would be some kind of vegetable, some horrible limp thing on the outside that had to be taken care of while the real me on the inside would helplessly know how different I was from before. I was afraid in therapy sessions. I had never imagined that I couldn't do everything I wanted with my body. Standing, sitting, walking, talking, manipulating things with my fingers. Moving as I'd wished, when I wanted. In therapy, I was confronted every single moment with all the things I could no longer do, that I could no longer do. Not even the most simple thing. And I was afraid things would never be better than this. In moving from my bed to my wheelchair, I was afraid that I would fall down and break my hip or one of my legs or arms. When I had to stand, I was afraid I could not hold my balance and no one would catch me before I hit the floor. I was afraid that no one would hear me if I called for help. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to call for help if I needed it. Fear is exhausting. I was ashamed of my fears, and that was even more exhausting. I believed that my fears weren't manly, and I had always been manly. I had always been the man who helped others. I had always been the man in my family. Now I was wearing adult diapers and waiting for doctors, therapists, and nurses who looked like 12-year-olds to help me bathe and dress, and eat also. I had only sleep and playtime to look forward to. Playtime therapy. When professionals who looked like they were playing hooky from sophomore English could order me to pick up poker chips, one at a time, and drop them in a glass. They could make me try to pick up pennies or try to lift my right hand. They could order me to stand by myself or to walk with only a cane between me and the floor. And with every order, fear that I would fail ballooned in my chest. All my fears unmanned me, and I was afraid all of the time. It was worse when I left the hospital, and worse still when I left the rehab center. I was almost paralyzed by my anxieties when I went home for the first time for Christmas, and I felt an enormous sadness when I realized how much I'd rather have been in the sterile and safe familiarity of the rehab hospital. After I had recovered enough to leave the hospital, I went home. At home, however, I felt sick with fear. There were no nurses and no therapists with me at home. There was no one checking in on me several times a night, and no one medically trained and experienced on call. None of the other patients were there. No people who shared my routine and to one degree or another shared my situation. There was only my family, only my wife Anna, and she was still doing all the work in keeping our family and our business going. And my stepdaughter Lisa. How would they find enough time for me? Once I was home, Anna thought the worst was over. She thought that she could stop being so afraid, that she could relax a little and even allow herself a drink or two at the end of the day. I would watch her drink, watch her relax, and then my worries would escalate. What if after drinking she would fall too deeply asleep to hear me if I needed her? What if there was a fire and she was asleep and didn't notice? Didn't remember that I was lying helpless in the next room. I couldn't move by myself, and as I lay in bed in the dark of the night, I would picture myself having seizures. Picture my flesh crackling in a fire I couldn't report. Picture myself unable to breathe or move or escape. At night I was so terrified that I could feel my breath shorten, heart speed up, thumping heavily against the walls of my chest. I lay awake, night after night, my mind filled with horrors. I stopped taking my sleeping pills. I hid them under my tongue until it was safe to get rid of them. I was afraid that I would sleep through some danger that would kill me. I practiced escape routes obsessively in my mind. How quickly could I reach my brace? How would I put it on by myself? Could I get to the window and call for help? Could I crawl out the window without it? Each one of my fears was hideous. My helplessness was hideous, and so were the nightmares that reflected it. In some ways, the fear has been the hardest of the challenges that followed my stroke.